Sherlock Holmes, Adventure 1, A Scandal in Bohemia, Part 1. To Sherlock Holmes, she is always the woman. I have seldom heard him call her any other name. In his eyes, she surpasses all other women. It is not that he felt any emotion like love for Irene Adler. All emotions, and that one particularly, were offensive to his cold, precise, but beautifully balanced mind. He was, I believe, the most perfect reasoning and observing machine that the world has ever seen. But as a lover, he would have been out of his role. He never spoke of the romantic emotions, except with ridicule and a cold laugh. They were wonderful things for the observer, excellent for revealing men's motives and actions. But for the trained reasoner to allow such distractions into his own personality was to introduce a factor which might throw doubt upon all his results. Grit in a sensitive instrument, or a crack in one of his own microscopes, would not be more disturbing than a strong emotion in a personality such as his. And yet, there was but one woman to him, and that woman was the late Irene Adler. I had seen little of Holmes lately. My marriage had drifted us away from each other. My own complete happiness, and those interests in the home which command the attention of the man who first finds himself with a family, were sufficient to take all my attention, while Holmes, who hated any form of socializing with all his soul, remained in our flat in Baker Street, buried among his old books, and alternating from week to week between lethargy and ambition, the sleepiness of the former and the fierce energy of the latter. He was still, as ever, greatly attracted by the study of crime, and used his great mental ability and amazing powers of observation in following out those clues and clearing up those mysteries which had been abandoned as hopeless by the official police. From time to time, I heard some vague story of his work, of his going to Odessa to solve the case of the Trepov murder, of his clearing up of the bizarre mystery of the Atkinson brothers in Sri Lanka, and finally of the mission which he had accomplished so delicately and successfully for the reigning family of Holland. Beyond these signs of activity, however, which I merely shared with all the readers of the newspapers, I knew little of my former friend and companion. One night, it was on the 20th of March, 1888, I was returning from a trip to a patient, when my way led me through Baker Street. As I passed the door, which must always be associated in my mind with meeting my wife, and with the dark incidents of the study in scarlet, I suddenly felt a desire to see Holmes again, and to know how he was using his powers. His rooms were brightly lit, and even as I looked up, I saw his tall, thin figure pass twice in a dark silhouette across the curtain. He was pacing the room swiftly, eagerly, with his head sunk upon his chest and his hands clasped behind him. To me, who knew his every mood and habit, his attitude and manner told their own story. He was at work again. He had risen out of his dreams and was hot upon the scent of some new problem. I rang the bell and went up to the flat, which had formerly been in part my own. He was not overly talkative. He seldom was. But he was glad, I think, to see me. With hardly a word spoken, but with a kindly eye, he waved me to an armchair, threw across his case of cigars, and pointed to a bar and a soda in the corner. Then he stood before the fire and looked me over in his unique, thoughtful way. "Marriage suits you," he remarked. "I think, Watson, that you have gained 7.5 pounds since I saw you." "7," I answered. "Really? I thought a little bit more." "Just a bit more, I think, Watson." And in practice, again, I observe. You did not tell me that you intended to go back into practice. Then how do you know? I see it. I deduce it. How do I know that you have been getting yourself very wet lately, and that you have a very clumsy and careless servant girl? My dear Holmes, said I, this is too much. You would certainly have been accused of being a witch had you lived a few centuries ago. It is true that I had a country walk on Thursday and came home very wet. But as I have changed my clothes, I can't imagine how you deduce it. As to Mary Jane, she is hopeless, and my wife has threatened to sack her. But there, again, I fail to see how you work it out. He chuckled to himself and rubbed his long, nervous hands together. It is simplicity itself, said he. My eyes tell me that on the inside of your left shoe, just where the light strikes it, the leather is cut by 6 almost parallel cuts. Obviously, they have been caused by someone who has very carelessly scraped round the edges of the sole in order to remove dried mud from it. So you see my double deduction, that you had been out in bad weather, and that you had a particularly careless servant. As to your practice, if a gentleman walks into my rooms smelling of idioform, with a black mark of silver nitrate upon his right forefinger, and a bulge on the right side of his top hat to show where he has hidden his stethoscope, I must be stupid if I do not realize that he is an actively practicing doctor. I could not help laughing at the ease with which he explained his process of deduction. When I hear you give your reasons, I said, the thing always appears to me to be so simple that I could easily do it myself, although each time I am baffled until you explain your process. And yet, I believe that my eyes are as good as yours. Quite so, he answered, lighting a cigarette and sitting down in an armchair. You see, but you do not observe. The distinction is clear. For example, you have frequently seen the steps which lead up from the hall to this room? Frequently. How often? Well, some hundreds of times. Then how many are there? How many? I don't know. Quite so. You have not observed, and yet you have seen. That is just my point. Now, I know that there are 17 steps, because I have both seen and observed. By the way, since you are interested in these little problems, and since you are good enough to record 1 or 2 of my little mysteries, you may be interested in this. He threw over a sheet of thick pink notepaper, which had been lying open upon the table. It came by the last post, said he. Read it aloud. The note was undated, and without either signature or address. There will call upon you tonight, at 7:45, it said, a gentleman who desires to consult you upon a matter of great importance. Your recent services to one of the royal houses of Europe have shown that you are one who may safely be trusted with matters which are of huge importance. This account of you we have from all quarters received. Be in your home then, and do not be surprised if your visitor wears a mask. This is indeed a mystery, I remarked. What do you imagine that it means? I have no data yet. It is a huge mistake to theorize before one has data. Unconsciously, one begins to twist facts to suit theories, instead of theories to suit facts. But the note itself, what do you deduce from it? I carefully examined the writing, and the paper upon which it was written. The man who wrote it was presumably rich, I remarked, trying to imitate my companion's processes. Such paper could not be bought under 1/2 crown a packet. It is strangely strong and stiff. Strange, that is the very word, said Holmes. "It is not an English paper at all. Hold it up to the light." I did so, and saw a large E with a small g and a P, and a large G with a small t woven into the texture of the paper. "What do you make of that?" asked Holmes. "The name of the maker, no doubt, or his symbol, rather." "Not at all. The G with a small t stands for Gesellschaft, which is the German for company. It is a common contraction, like our CO, co. P, of course, stands for papier. Now for the EG. Let us glance at our library." He took down a heavy brown book from his shelves. Eglonitz. Here we are, Egria. It is a German-speaking country in Bohemia, not far from Carlsbad, notable for its numerous glass and paper factories. "Ha ha, my boy, what do you make of that?" His eyes sparkled, and he blew a blue cloud of smoke from his cigarette. "The paper was made in Bohemia," I said. "Precisely, and the man who wrote the note is a German. Do you note the strangeness of the sentence? This account of you we have from all quarters received. A Frenchman or Russian could not have written that. It is the German who is so unkind to his verbs. It only remains, therefore, to discover what is wanted by this German who writes upon Bohemian paper and prefers wearing a mask to showing his face. And here he comes, if I am not mistaken, to solve all our doubts." As he spoke, there was a sound of horses' hooves and wheels, followed by a sharp pull at the bell. Holmes whistled. "A pair, by the sound of it," said he. "Yes," he continued, glancing out of the window. "A nice little carriage and a pair of beautiful horses. £150 apiece. There's money in this case, Watson, if there is nothing else." "I think that I had better go, Holmes." "Not a bit, Doctor. Stay where you are. This promises to be interesting. It would be a pity to miss it." "But your client?" "Never mind him. I may want your help, and so may he. Here he comes. Sit down in that armchair, Doctor, and give us your attention." A slow and heavy step paused immediately outside the door. Then there was a loud and assertive knock. "Come in," said Holmes. A man entered who could hardly have been less than 6 feet 6 inches in height, with the chest and limbs of a Hercules. His dress was rich in a way which could, in England, be considered bad taste. He wore a coat, while the deep blue cloak which was thrown over his shoulders was lined with flame-colored silk and attached at the neck with a pin which consisted of a single barrel. Boots which extended halfway up his lower legs, and which had rich brown fur at the top, completed the outfit. He carried a hat in his hand, while he wore across the upper part of his face a black mask, which he had apparently put on that very moment, for his hand was still touching it as he entered. From the lower part of his face, he appeared to be a man of strong character, with a thick lip and a long, straight chin. "You had my note?" he asked, with a deep, harsh voice and a strong German accent. "I told you that I would come." He looked from one of us to the other, as if uncertain whom to address. "Pray take a seat," said Holmes. "This is my friend and colleague, Dr. Watson, who is occasionally good enough to help me in my cases. Whom have I the honor to address?" "You may address me as the Count von Kram, a Bohemian nobleman. I understand that this gentleman, your friend, is a man of honor and discretion, whom I may trust with something extremely important. If not, I should much prefer to communicate with you alone. I rose to go, but Holmes caught me by the wrist and pushed me back into my chair. It is both or none, said he. You may say before this gentleman anything which you may say to me. The Count shrugged his broad shoulders. Then I must begin, said he, by asking you both to swear to keep this secret for 2 years. At the end of that time it will not matter. At present, it is not too much to say that it is of such an importance it may have an influence upon European history. I promise, said Holmes. And I. You will excuse this mask, continued our strange visitor. The noble person who employs me wishes me to be unknown to you, and I may confess the name by which I have just called myself is not exactly my own. I was aware of it, said Holmes dryly. The circumstances are very delicate, and every precaution has to be taken to stop what might grow to be a huge scandal and seriously harm one of the reigning families of Europe. To speak plainly, the matter affects the great house of the kings of Bohemia. I was also aware of that, murmured Holmes, sitting deeper into his armchair and closing his eyes. Our visitor glanced with some surprise at the lazy, relaxed figure of the man who had been, no doubt, depicted to him as the most intelligent reasoner and most energetic detective in Europe. Holmes slowly reopened his eyes and looked impatiently at his huge client. If your Majesty will simply tell us his problem, he remarked, I will be better able to advise you. The man jumped from his chair and paced up and down the room in turmoil. Then he tore the mask from his face and threw it upon the ground. You are right, he cried. I am the king. Why should I attempt to conceal it? Why, indeed, said Holmes. Your Majesty had not spoken before I was aware that I was addressing William von Ormstein, King of Bohemia. But you can understand, said our strange visitor, sitting down once more and passing his hand over his high white forehead. You can understand that I am not accustomed to doing such business in my own person. Yet the matter was so delicate that I could not confide it to an agent without putting myself in his power. I have come in disguise from Bohemia to consult you. Then, pray consult, said Holmes, shutting his eyes once more. The facts are briefly these. Some 5 years ago, during a lengthy visit to Warsaw, I got to know the well-known adventuress Irene Adler. No doubt you have heard of her. Kindly look her up in my files, Doctor, said Holmes without opening his eyes. For many years he had adopted a system of saving all articles concerning men and things, so that it was difficult to name a subject or a person on which he could not at once find information. I found her biography. Let me see, said Holmes. Born in America in the year 1858. Contralto? Prima donna. Imperial Opera of Warsaw. Yes. Retired from opera stage. Ha! Living in London. Quite so. Your Majesty, as I understand, had a relationship with this young person. Wrote her some embarrassing letters, and would now like to get those letters back. Precisely so. But how? Was there a secret marriage? None. No legal papers or certificates? None. Then I fail to follow, Your Majesty. If this young person should show others her letters for blackmail or other purposes, how is she to prove that they are real? There is the writing. Pooh, forgery. My private notepaper. Stolen. My own seal. Copied. My photograph. Bought. We were both in the photograph. Oh dear, that is very bad. Your Majesty has indeed made a mistake. I was mad, insane. You have compromised yourself seriously. I was only prince then. I was young. I am but 30 now. It must be recovered. We have tried and failed. Your Majesty must pay. It must be bought. She will not sell. Stolen then. 5 attempts have been made. Twice thieves in my pay searched her house. Once we searched her luggage when she traveled. Twice she has been ambushed. There has been no result. No sign of it? Absolutely none. Holmes laughed. It is quite a pretty little problem, said he. But a very serious one to me, answered the king sourly. Yes, indeed. And what does she plan to do with the photograph? To ruin me. But how? I am about to be married. So I have heard. To Claudia Toxvig, second daughter of the King of Sweden. You may know the strict rules of her family. She is herself completely pure. A shadow of a doubt about my behavior would end our engagement. And Irene Adler threatens to send them the photograph. And she will do it. I know that she will do it. You do not know her, but she has a soul of steel. She has the face of the most beautiful of women, and the mind of the most determined of men. To prevent me from marrying another woman, there are no lengths to which she would not go. None. Are you sure she has not sent it yet? I am sure. And why? Because she has said she would send it on the day when the engagement was publicly announced. That will be next Monday. Oh, then we have 3 days yet, said Sherlock Holmes with a yawn. That is very fortunate, as I have 1 or 2 matters of importance to look into just at present. Your Majesty will, of course, stay in London for the present? Certainly. You will find me at the Langham, under the name of the Count von Kram. Then I shall drop you a line to let you know how we progress. Pray do so. Then, as to money. Anything. Absolutely. I tell you that I will give one of the provinces of my kingdom to have that photograph. And for present expenses? The king took a heavy leather bag from under his cloak and laid it on the table. There are 300 pounds in gold and 700 in notes, he said. Holmes wrote a receipt upon a sheet of his notepaper and handed it to him. And the lady's address? He asked. Is Briony Lodge, Serpentine Avenue, St. John's Wood. Holmes took a note of it. One other question, said he. Was the photograph a cabinet? It was. Then good night, Your Majesty, and I trust that we shall soon have some good news for you. And good night, Watson, he added, as the wheels of the royal carriage rolled down the street. If you will be good enough to come tomorrow afternoon at 3 o'clock, I should like to chat this little matter over with you.